their country. We also acknowledge the Kaurna people as the custodians of the greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Kaurna people today. This session will be used solely for the purpose of information sharing and not for building consensus positions or otherwise discharging Council's deliberative and decision-making functions. I remind members that tonight's session must not deal with the matter in a way that obtains or effectively obtains a decision on a matter outside of a formally constituted council or council committee meeting. If you can turn your phones to silent, if you need to take a phone call, can you please take it outside? I've got my phone on silent, and if people can put their phones on silent, and if you get a phone call, if you need to take it outside, please do so. Okay, thank you. Okay, Michael, you first up. Hey, it's a workshop. Yes, then we have a meeting. Yeah. There we go.
Thank you, councillors. Michael McKeown from Jensen Plus, so part of the team who have been working on the land use planning aspect of the Gawler Growth Framework. It's good to see you again. So this evening's presentation is really an overview of the draft land use plan that we have been building up to in advance. We anticipate of a public consultation process to follow, and if you go to the next slide, please. What I would like to do, and the slides are a little bit squashed there, but I think you should still be able to follow the essence of the presentation. It's a little bit better on the screen to my left, I think. I'll give you a quick recap of the project methodology, as well as a recap of some of the workshop and previous engagement outcomes. And then number 3 there, we're going to take you through some key aspects of the draft plan that's, I think, part of your package of reports tonight. Next slide. So we and our team and our colleagues from SMEC, when it comes to transport planning, and you'll hear from James a little bit later, have been working on this project really since the start of the year. There's a little snapshot, a timeline, if you like, of what we've been doing since January. We've had a couple of stakeholder and community engagement phases already. We've had a community survey and community drop-in sessions back in February, March, and we also did some stakeholder workshops in April and May, which has led us to where we are now with our draft plans. And as I indicated, we anticipate another phase of community consultation to begin soon, which will include 3 community information sessions as well as online information. And we anticipate that the final plan after that consultation will be ready by September for Council's consideration once again.
I think Councillor Koch has got a question. I'll just turn your microphone off and put his on.
I think I've asked this question before, and I'd just like to clarify it in the public. We're now going to go into community information forums, and in our documents it says how that information is going to be used to modify or change the draft. What happens if the community comes back and says, we're not interested in urban sprawl, we're not interested in this? You know, we said right at the start, back there somewhere, we weren't interested, and you've done all this work. What do? Do you just keep ploughing ahead, or do you just dismiss what the community might say?
Thanks for the question. We will summarise the feedback we get from all community members and stakeholders and report back to yourselves. And if the situation exists where there's very strong feedback about one or more issues, then that will be a response and a decision that you as councillors will ultimately have to make. And we will definitely take into account with any recommendations that we make, the detail and also the themes of the community engagement. So we will summarise the engagement once it happens, and then it will come back to you for any any final decisions about any plan.
Okay. Any other questions? No. You can keep moving, Michael.
Okay, next slide. Thank you. So for the benefit of the councillors who were part of some earlier presentations, I'll just remind you that we did some co-design workshops back in April and May, and after looking at several different growth scenarios for Gawler, we kind of had a concept for a scenario that was called at the time Greener Gawler. Next slide, please. And when we met with yourselves in June, there were a number of comments and feedbacks that we, and areas of feedback that we heard from you. We talked about the concept of living and working locally, and we talked about the balance between residential and employment land uses. We heard some feedback about transport connectivity and the opportunities for rail extensions. We talked, as Councillor Kosh indicated, about community views and whether some community members were not supportive of a larger town. We were asked whether the Cudla area was included in the broad plan, and it is. We talked about the sports precinct, and we talked about some of the other issues such as the interurban break. And we did hear from you councillors, I think, that it was important that you wanted to set out your vision through this plan and other initiatives, so that the community and other stakeholders, including the state government, would know what your views and policies are around the plan. And we're back today with the draft plan July 2024 that I'm going to take you through over the next few minutes. Next slide. So the overarching vision statement, which is really just a short phrase that tries to encapsulate the plan. We are trying to create a plan that's about greener growth that's right for Gawler. And so I want to talk through what we mean by that. Next slide. Partly that's expressed through the 6 guiding principles, which we've adjusted slightly since our last meeting, changed the order slightly. So the number 1 principle is really about identity and values. That includes everything from the separation between Playford and Gawler, the importance of Gawler as a regional centre and destination, as well as the heritage and character. The Greener Gawler theme, which includes environmental planning, it includes sustainability, it includes greener streets and parks and public open spaces, the Gawler River and important environmental corridors. Number 3, housing choice, diversity and affordability. The need for housing to be well designed, cater for different household types and be in the right locations. Local employment is still an important principle, and there's a whole series of locations where that can be supported through the plan. We want a connected town, both through transport but also through community connections and open space connections. And we also want to make sure that the future is a brighter future that has community services like education, community centres and other community services. So they're the 6 principles that we're trying to promote to achieve the vision. Next slide. There's also a few kind of underlying planning themes. I'll just speak to these briefly. It's a little bit technical, it's a little bit of planning theory, but we know through the state government's regional plan that they're very interested in the concept of living locally, which we've added the word working, so living and working locally, so having opportunities where well-located housing and jobs can be relatively close together to have healthy, vibrant neighbourhoods and really a greater choice of housing in the right places. So that underpins some of this plan. Next slide. We've also got this idea that we've talked to you about, that we're planning for the long term, or the sort of ultimate plan that's right for Gawler. So we know that there's lots of population projections, and we know that they have different end dates and different rates of growth, and they're not exact, but they all are predicting significant growth over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we've said, well, what's the right long-term plan for Gawler based on the constraints and opportunities, and we won't worry as much about how long it might take us to get there in this plan. And then the third conceptual framework that we just want to introduce or reintroduce is about a regenerative planning approach, and this is a kind of leading edge thinking, if you like. How do we have planning and development that regenerates communities and environments and economies? And how do we think beyond our study area as well? How is this plan going to influence the surrounding region, in fact, Greater Adelaide as well?
Councillor Koch has got another question.
Sure.
So I'll just take...
Michael, I was quite interested in reading those little frameworks, in particular this nested one. It's interesting that the second nest, Outer North Sub-Regional Roseworthy Concordia, which is the second nest, actually says job creation, biodiverse habitats, green networks, and then it says limit urban sprawl. So that's part of your nested framework there. And now I'm coming back again to this urban sprawl, and people are going to say this is urban sprawl. But you've got it here in your little nest that you want to limit urban sprawl, but what I see on your draft is urban sprawl. So I don't know, you can make some comments, but that's what it looks like to me.
What's the point of order? You've asked a question. Yeah, that's a question. Yeah. So you called a point of order. What was the point of order? No. No. Okay. Thank you.
So, yes, the question is, in this little nest, it talks about limiting urban...
If you could put your microphone on, thank you.
In this nest, it talks about limiting urban sprawl. Do you think what you're offering in that draft is urban sprawl?
Okay, thank you. Michael?
No, I do not. I do acknowledge that, of course, growing in a larger city, it's a difficult balancing act between how much land changes in its use and how much is maintained for either rural or environmental purposes. It's a tricky balance. We are attempting to plan for coordinated, well-planned urban growth to meet the needs of the future community. We're not trying to plan for urban sprawl, would be my response to the question. But I'm interested in your feedback on the regenerative planning, and others may have views on that too. So, next slide. So, I guess the overall plan, the key plan in our document is the long-term spatial plan for Gawler, and it's a little bit far away from me, but I'll just talk to a few of the elements of it as an introduction, and then we'll kind of zoom in a little bit as well through the presentation. So the colours do relate to land uses, and generally in planning, the pink and red colours are generally residential areas, and often the blue areas are our town centres and local centres, and purple we often use for employment land. So this plan shows a few things. It does show, I hope, a greener and more connected Gawler River corridor. My laser pointer's not going to work for me. It shows in brown around Hillier and maintaining a significant area of land for horticulture and agricultural uses where it is deemed to be viable. We have shown in this plan, and we'll come into more detail, an urban growth area to the south of Gawler, south of where we have Evanston Gardens. And we're also showing a green interurban break between Gawler and Playford, which comes through the Cudla area, and there's several different aspects of that. We've shown in our kind of blue dots a local centres network of neighbourhood centres where people can live locally. We intend, and we've also shown towards the southeast bottom right of the plan a larger employment area of about 90 hectares to support jobs.
I've got a question around the Gawler River. How will you improve the Gawler River?
This plan doesn't really go into a lot of detail on that, on either the implementation. I suppose this is more of a high-level aspiration about and a direction that we seek, but it would need a lot more investigations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Koch, if you can ask a question, thank you.
Yeah, Michael, looking down the bottom there of the employment area, what types of employments are you envisaging?
Thank you. There you go.
I think it would be the diverse range of local employment, local servicing industries. It could include some small-scale manufacturing. It could include commercial uses that service construction, that service other agricultural industries. It's not a kind of major manufacturing plant or or a major logistics precinct. It's smaller scale, small and medium-sized businesses who are probably servicing the local area.
Just on employment, would you envisage, say, a retail strip along Main North Road as employment? Because retail is obviously a big employer in this town. Retail, as for example, as strip development along Main North Road.
I think the vision for the planning areas would actually have retail more concentrated in the local centres and town centres, and probably less emphasis on strip development as you describe it. But inevitably, some retail might be larger in scale and has a bit of a wholesale element and does want to locate closer to major roads and transport networks, which we already see, of course, around the town. But when you see in a minute, when we zoom into the southern area, we're suggesting we want to get a more concentrated retail centre close to the future train station as well, yeah, which we'll come to in a sec. Shall we go to the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And just one back. Thanks. So I thought it was important at this point just to talk about the high level kind of population and housing aspirations or capacity that this plan might suggest. So at this point in time, Gawler is a town of about 25,000 people, and there's about 10,000 dwellings. This long-term plan is really looking at whether there is the capacity to double the town to around about 50,000 people with an additional 10,000 dwellings. And we think through our measurements and modelling, about 6,000 of those additional dwellings are already catered for in your zoned land for greenfield housing, and also some modest infill in existing suburbs and in the town centre. And what the plan is really adding is the potential for an additional 4,000 dwellings of future housing land, predominantly in the south, which could then cater for that larger town over time. And whether that's 30 years or 40 years or 50 years, well, time will tell. But that is the framework that this plan is suggesting. Next slide. So alongside the housing, we know that we need to plan for community infrastructure as well. So I'll just give you a snapshot. We have done some modelling of the existing community infrastructure and tried to get a bit of a gauge on where the gaps might be for a larger town of up to 50,000 people. And we think there would be a need for example, potentially one additional public primary school, potentially an additional public high school. The private and non-government school sector does make it a little bit complicated to plan for this, but we think there's that kind of need. There could be a need for an additional library, community centres, and also active public open space, particularly a sports precinct in the south. So there is some analysis behind that. Next slide.
Oh, certainly, yes.
Michael, this is one that I've struggled with reading this document and going to other workshops about sports. Could you just tell that 89.5 hectares? What's that exactly?
Where's the 89?
Proposed provision.
Oh, 234.
Yeah, sorry, with active open space, 2 hectares per 1,000 people.
Okay.
Is that saying we need...
89.52 hectares. Okay.
What does that mean?
Yeah. I'll just go to Michael.
Yes.
I think at this kind of high level, so public open space, there's lots of different types, as you would understand. There'll be local parks, you've got your larger recreation parks, you've got sporting parks, and you've also got your passive open spaces. So it's a little bit complex to kind of measure so far ahead exactly what types of open space we'll need. I think probably the main message for this plan is really about the sporting open space and the need for that. I think some of the other quantums of open space, it's very hard to really determine whether you're over or under, because a lot of your open space might not be that usable if it's, for example, steep terrain or vegetated. So it's pretty hard to have a high level, or you're short of open space, or you've got an excess of open space. So I wouldn't read too much into that figure. I think the message from this plan is thinking about the southern area and thinking about that strategic southern sports park. That's probably the main outcome from this analysis.
Okay, thank you. Is that doesn't? Oh, okay, no worries. No
Next slide,
worries.
thanks. I'll just kind of mention a few details of the plan. You've heard some of these themes already, but the kind of key urban structuring elements of the plan, we do want to maintain a viable and prosperous horticultural and agricultural sector in the town of Gawler. It's important to the town's economy and to the town's setting and character and culture. We do want to maintain a separation between Playford and Gawler, which is tricky because there's pressure for land use change, and we do acknowledge that there can and perhaps should be some low-density housing within that interurban break. Significantly, we are planning for those current and future greenfield areas on the right-hand side, and the what's called the southern area in that diagram is probably the new area that's not currently planned for, and also acknowledging Concordia and Roseworthy to the north. Next slide. I did mention to you, but planning for some additional employment land in the south of the town, we also believe helps support the town's future economy and prospects. We do want to promote an activity centre network so that there's more than just the town centre, but also we're not necessarily looking to compete with the town centre in scale, and there could be at least one new activity centre in the south. The sporting precinct, close to Main North Road, we anticipate being a good location as part of a green infrastructure network. And when I say green infrastructure, that's your creek lines and your open spaces, but it's also privately owned rural land and rural living areas which have an environmental value as much as a individual value, and greening the suburbs as well, so that you have get to your canopy cover target of 30% over time.
You've got another question, Councillor Kosh.
Andrew this time.
Andrew?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
When I read the document, it talks about the sporting precinct as being a replacement for Gawler South, okay? Because they're fully subscribed, everything else.
Yeah.
But when I read this document, it's saying that we need extra active, like sporting fields for this extra population. But I can't see in any of these documents or plans the extra sporting fields. So I would have thought if we were developing a plan now for down the track, we'd actually allocate land for another football or cricket ground, because the previous slide, we actually said that with this population, you need 2 hectares per 1,000 of active open space, which means you must, somewhere along the line...
So what's the question?
The question is, where is the extra football ground?
Okay.
That's the question.
Through the chair. I'm pretty sure it's one of the slides further on. It's certainly in the attachment A, which has been presented by Jensen Plus. Basically, there are 2 sites which are both 20 hectares which we have to work through. One is on the Urban Renewal SA site. That's shown in the drawings, and the alternative site is right on the corner of Dalkeith Road and Main North Road, but that's a number of private landowners which would have to be negotiated with in terms of fair and reasonable market value. Those are things we'd have to test as part of the structure plan, which we have talked about a few times in my report. And I guess the devil's in the detail. There are 2 sites, but they're both 20 hectares, and that's what we need to test out in terms of the market mechanism, because clearly council can't afford to purchase 20 hectares of land, and it would either have to be a negotiation with renewal, or if they are of the view that they prefer to develop their land with less open space, the legally required open space they should provide may be a cash in lieu scenario, and we use that money to secure land from private landowners at fair and reasonable value. So that's a scenario we have to work through as part of the structure plan.
So that's somewhere here. You show you
Okay.
We'll get through that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you go to the next slide, thanks. Clearly the transport networks are very important to the planning as well, and we'll hear from James about how they are being assessed and modelled, but we are planning for a network of walking and cycling routes that will connect the centres and the communities. One of the big ideas, which we've already heard about, is the concept of creating a new rail station to the north of Cudlah to service the residential growth areas, and also the ideas that the state government may be looking at to expand rail networks to the north. We'll also hear from James about how improved road network connections, including connectivity to the north through Roseworthy, but also east-west connectivity, potentially through and facilitating our southern residential area, would be really important infrastructure investments to support this plan over time. And kind of related to transport, but is more of a theme around amenity and landscape value and identity. We do think there should be stronger entry statements on the way into Gawler from all your kind of access points from the north and the south to really emphasise that you're here and reflect the character of the town and the community. Next slide. Okay, so this diagram shows a little bit more detail about the southern area concept, and I should emphasise this is a concept. It's not a resolved plan. It's not, the land use areas are not reconciled to property scales yet. But orientation-wise, Main North Road is the sort of darker black line with arrows coming diagonally left to top right. My laser is almost working. The railway pretty much through the centre of the picture. So we are showing a potential for a new railway station and also a local centre to really facilitate a walkable neighbourhoods on both sides of the railway to access that service and provide local amenity and housing in close proximity to that infrastructure in the middle there. The green rectangle is nominally the 20-hectare sports park, which would be highly accessible to the people in the south of the town, but also accessible to all the visiting teams and participants from elsewhere in Gawler and beyond. So the pink and red colours are really our residential lands, which are surrounded by rural and green areas to the south and to the west. I think it's probably significant, again, to point out the interurban break that is proposed between Gawler and Playford, which is in green. Now, that does not mean that that land is all in, it's not a kind of all open space or a reserve or anything. Some of it will be. There's cemeteries in there. There will be public open space. But a lot of that land will be residential land that we anticipate can remain as a part of that interurban break. And we anticipate that it can change over time and be more vegetated and function as a landscape connection as much as a residential neighbourhood and place to live. So, as Andrew suggested, the council have been working with the state government on this land. Renewal SA are a major landowner, and the notion of an integrated and more detailed structure plan has been put forward to resolve the planning for this southern area. But we have put forward a notion that up to 4,000 dwellings additional could be accommodated in this area, plus 92 hectares of additional employment land, as well as the green and rural and horticultural land uses that are indicated in this concept. So that's a big idea.
Councillor Koch, you've got Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, so obviously there's a lot of interest from local Cudlah landowners, many of whom are here with us today. So when you look at this break, when you look at that residential area, is that largely Renewal SA land, or is there going to be changes of use in areas that are currently owned by people?
Said the exact boundaries are not determined by this plan, but I would anticipate that yes, the Renewal SA land would be part of that growth area, and some land owned by other landowners would also be part of that. The Renewal SA land is not everything that's coloured pink in that slide.
You've got another question?
Thanks, Mayor. Michael, that's the first time I've heard houses in that green area. What sort of density are you talking about?
It's a good question, because I think we have to balance the ability to maintain a rural setting and maintain a landscape character with vegetation. So we have suggested that a low density of maybe 2 dwellings a hectare, which is about 5,000 square metre allotments, could be a balance where it's a lifestyle option. It may allow for some subdivision of some existing properties, but those properties, the allotments that are created are large enough that they can actually have a green character and they're not a suburban character. So some of the land that's shown maybe with that green hatch or in that kind of general vicinity could be subject to that kind of planning control if these ideas were implemented in policy. Next slide. So the Gawler East precinct is largely already planned. So in this document, we're really confirming the existing planning and reflecting the assumptions around the additional housing supply that exists there, which is over 2,000 dwellings. Some of the infrastructure is still to be fully implemented. Some of the open space networks, of course. One of the local centres is developing, but there can be another centre in blue towards the south. And also the connectivity between Gawler East and to the north through towards Concordia is a area of interest for this plan, and maybe James will talk more about that in the next presentation.
With the creek lines, they're very steep.
Yes.
They're very, very steep. So how would you put a shared path through them?
Well, it might, for example, be on the edge of some of the development areas and not go close to the creek, or they might be disconnected, and there might be some sections that are actually on the creek, and then some sections that come round the suburban streets and then rejoin the network. I imagine, and we haven't again done the planning for Gawler East, those open space corridors are multifunction, so they've got environmental function, they may have some stormwater function, and they may have limited recreation function as well.
Right. David Hughes?
Just a question on the blue area, the activity centre. What are you sort of thinking for there?
I think the existing planning anticipates really what we've already seen in the first centre, so small supermarket and specialty shops and small business location, maybe some community infrastructure as well, really servicing the local population, the local catchment. But again, this is part of the existing planning. It's not necessarily new planning concepts that we are introducing.
Okay, keep going.
Next slide. We're getting close to the end here. Gawler Town Centre, again, we haven't done a lot of planning for the town centre, but we acknowledge that there is an existing urban design framework which talks about mixed-use development and public realm character. We do have some advice about future retail floor space and commercial floor space that may be required or may be viable based on a larger town. So there's an important question about, well, where is that to be located? How can we support that development? And perhaps more town centre planning is needed for that. James will also talk about some transport ideas. You understand the issues well with freight and road transport bottlenecks in the town centre, but we need to move towards ideas and solutions. So James will talk to that soon. Next slide. And then just coming towards the end of this, of the summary of the draft plan, we're thinking about implementation as well. And we've got some principles there on the screen that we acknowledge are going to be part of that implementation programme. There will be additional investigations and more detailed planning needed for some aspects of under this plan, so the southern areas particularly, but also updated social infrastructure plans and sport and recreation plans to really nut out the detail of the sporting precinct. I mentioned partnerships with landowners, including the state government and others. Community benefit, clearly this is a plan that has to support community outcomes. Number 4 there is really important in the short term because this plan is being devised to inform the regional plan that the state government are creating and put forward this council's policy when it comes to growth and change in your area. We need to make sure it's an achievable plan and staged, and it needs to be sustainable outcomes as well, including the management and maintenance of everything that's proposed. Next slide. And just to speak to the public consultation that's proposed and would be subject to your agreement, but we have planned for a consultation process where the draft documents, of course, will be made available for review and feedback, including via online and in-person formats. We have planned for 3 community drop-in sessions, 31st of July being the first, and also 6th of August and 10th of September. There's a little bit of a staged approach to the consultation that's proposed, really because the detail of the transport modelling will not be available until slightly later, which is indicated as phase 2 on that page there, but really the guts of the plan that we've already seen tonight would be available very soon for public consultation and review. And that is the last slide, I think.
So
we're at the end.
when will elected members get Gawler Integrated Transport Strategy?
That might best
when
be
will
a
that-
question for
James?
Andrew or James.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you want to speak?
Looking at me. Okay. Right. Yeah. So as we've indicated, there's a bit of a staged approach with the engagement, but the intention would be that James will speak to the timing exactly as to when the model will be finished, but all the modelling information will be shared on the wall as part of probably drop-in session 3, if not before. It will give some of the results in terms of what it indicates on congestion and possible some ideas on road and other priorities, particularly bicycle and other access modes. And ultimately that will be put into the work by Jensen, which you will see in the September final strategy. But also separate to that, you'll also see...
We don't get it till 16th of September?
So what I'm saying, yeah, so I've got timelines here. So effectively what you will see is engagement 1, which will be on Jensen's work to date, plus southern rural areas, which is provided tonight, and the MEMO, which you've got tonight, which is the interim, if you like, progress report from SMEC. But what will happen then is the actual detailed modelling, which gives exact traffic volumes and the rest of it, that will come out in a couple of weeks. It will be probably after the first session of engagement that occurs. But ultimately, what you'll see here is that when Jensen's work comes back to council, you will see the modelling that's come through, which is fairly technical. It's not going to substantially change the priorities which we've got at this point in time. It might be more specific on things like whether there's some widening on certain roads and other things, but that will come through largely in the second round.
Okay, so when are we going to get the Gawler Integrated Transport Strategy? When will it land for elected members?
So we'll share that information at the 24th of September. So when you've got the Jensen work, we'll brief you separately on the findings from SMEC's work, and you will ultimately get to adopt the Integrated Transport Strategy on the 9th of October.
Right, okay. James, are you going to do your presentation now? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I beg your pardon? Oh, you've got another question for Michael?
In one of our sessions, we talked about getting some advice from Dew about the interurban break. Has that information come through yet?
I don't recall that particular point. I do know that Green Adelaide are working on a regional landscape plan and green space plan. I don't actually know the status of that. Perhaps. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. James.
Everyone for having me here to present an update on what we call the GITS, the Gawler Integrated Transport Strategy. Next slide, thanks. So just a bit of an overview of our approach to delivery. So the way we've approached the GITS is to break it up into 2 phases, being the short-term baseline planning and then the horizon, which is the medium to long-term planning. And there's been a big focus on a collaborative and integrated approach between ourselves, Jensen and Council, and I think it's been an excellent process. We are combining planning, modelling and consultation to get an optimal approach to the strategy. It's very important that we understand what the current issues are. It's also very important that we can actually look forward and see what the future may hold to understand what may be needed and what's coming. So in terms of the objectives, a key strategy has been around listening to the community, stakeholders and council. We want to understand what the current issues are, what the current concerns are, so that we can then build that into what we've done in terms of looking at the short term, and then obviously the longer term, which will influence things like the G2046, but also GARP, the rural southern areas, the Northern Adelaide Transport Study as well. There's a range of planning ongoing at the moment. Playford's got a transport strategy going as well. It'll all interrelate as a result of this. Next slide, thanks. So we'll just run through a baseline assessment of the various modes, and we'll start with the road. And so we've had a look at volumes, the road hierarchy, the freight network, and also had a look at crashes. And there's a few key observations that come out of it in terms of what we've observed from the data, such as Murray Street with very high volumes. Schoenberg Drive is actually quite low in terms of volumes. The peak hours are very pronounced, and in actual fact the PM school peak is the peak hour, not necessarily the commuter peak. And also that Dalkeith has a high number. And from that, we've got a range of recommendations, and the ones I want to focus in on is Murray Street, and that is that there are a lot of crashes down Murray Street, and those crashes are vehicular, they are with pedestrians, there have been serious injuries, there have been fatalities. It is a very, very busy area. It's the heart of the town. And when we compare it to other regional towns, so take Harndorf, for instance, you're not quite, but you're nearly double the traffic volumes. And you're also higher in terms of freight as well, which is one of the big reasons why the Harndorf study occurred. So we actually believe there's a very important need to actually look at the central area. It is the heart, it is the hub, and so much happens in this area. And it needs a strategy to look at and a planning study to look at what is the long-term vision for the town centre. The other thing we think is important is around, I guess, strategic network planning. There's a lot of growth planned. And so it's very important that as these areas are developed, such as the rural southern areas, that the right level of transport planning is input into it so that it looks at not only the local access, but also in terms of the broader strategic access. And that's where things like the Cuddler relocation of the train station is an important element. But in terms of Gawler, we need to be thinking about the fact that there's a large southern area that may develop. How is that going to be integrated into the central and the northern parts of Gawler? And that's where really the strategic network planning is needed to make sure there's a vision for how we're going to connect Gawler, and it's not just going to be an isolated development. With public transport, we've had a look at services, we've had a look at the network as well, and also the patronage. And there's some very clear things, and that is that Gawler has a very good rail line, but its bus services are very limited. There's no buses on the weekend outside of the on-demand. The on-demand is actually really popular and actually gets booked out, and that can be a problem because then people don't have reliable access. And when we talk about how public transport will be successful, we focus on two key factors, and that is reliability and frequency. And if we don't have both of those, we will not have a very successful public transport network. So when you think about the on-demand service, it's a great service, but there's only two buses usually. And if one of them goes up to Roseworthy, there's one bus servicing the entirety of Gawler, which means that you're waiting quite a long time to get it. So you're not getting the frequency you need. And then in terms of reliability, if it gets mixed in amongst the congestion down Murray Street, you're not getting that reliability as well.
So what's your suggestion to improve public transport?
Sure. And so one of our recommendations is that obviously SAPTA and the state government runs the public transport, and so it's advocacy for more buses to service the on-demand in the interim so that you can then have more buses running around, more people can get picked up, there's more reliability that you can actually get a service. The other thing is around the new developments in particular, and I would say if you look at the public transport network for the buses, you'll see there's a bus network that extends down towards Evanston Gardens, but then you realise that it's actually two services and they run in the peak hours, and outside the peak hours they don't run. And you go, so effectively half of Gawler relies on the on-demand service, which also services Roseworthy. So one thing that's needed, especially with the new developments, are fixed services that are running during the week. They're not just running during peak times, they're running during the non-peak periods and also on the weekends. And one of the things around reliability is that if I rely on a certain bus service during the week and I want to do something on the weekend and it's not there, then I might decide, well, do I keep using the bus or do I just drive all the time?
Yeah.
And that's what can change people's opinion.
So, how do you link the bus services with the train?
So at the moment, the fixed bus services are all geared around effectively feeding into the rail network. So the actual fixed services do their job as provided that you'll want to travel on the train. The issue is that the services don't really target taking you from activity centre to activity centre. And one of the things we've observed with the on-demand patronage figures and where they're going to and from is that a lot of people are going to the rail station. In other words, they would like a bus to the rail station, they can't get it. Or they're going to Murray Street, or they're going to a shopping centre or a doctor's service. So what we're seeing is activity centres, which are where people want to go to. At schools as well. We picked up very much strongly both Trinity and Gawler. Both have large numbers of bus services, the on-demand going there. So in reality, part of what we need is not just additional on-demand services in the short term, but it's also about saying, well, what do we want, and this is where I talk about the strategic planning, what do we want the actual public transport network to service? Is it just to service people to get on the rail, to leave Gawler, or is it also to service people moving within Gawler and give them a viable alternative choice? And if you don't have that, then you never consider that you want that because it's not something you have as it is. So people tend to focus on traffic and walking because that's what we can do. And so they don't so much think about cycling and public transport because it's not really a viable choice. I mean, I give the good example. If I'm in an on-demand service area and let's say I work here in Salisbury or Mawson Lakes and I want to catch the train, then I have to book the on-demand service in the morning and the evening every single day. And if they're not available, how am I getting to my train station? I'm driving. So this is part of the problem, is there's a serious neglect of public transport in the outer north, and Gawler is very poorly serviced in that respect. But I will say the on-demand definitely is something which you need more buses of because it is well received, it's liked, it's easy to use. But again, a bit of the problem with the on-demand is if one person is going from A to B and you want to go to C and C's not on that route, then you'll have to wait till that trip's done before you can then get picked up. So occupancy-wise, it's not great either. But it's still a matter of we can't just jump to the end. We've got to progressively improve. Next slide. So in terms of active travel, we've looked at the existing network, the strategies, and we've done a lot of consultation as well because it's pretty important to understand A, what the public thinks, and also B, what's actually happening within council. So the map up there kind of shows a patchwork quilt of sort of connectivity. And I think everyone would know the Adelaide Special, which is that there's a bike lane, there's an intersection, it disappears, and then a bike lane reappears after the intersection, and the cyclist is just left to fend for themselves. So if that happens, then are you really going to want your child to ride to school? Are you going to want to commute to work? So this is where the need is to look at what are the key corridors and to connect them. That's got to be the focus so that we can start to actually have meaningful connectivity within Gawler. And one of the easy things we thought about is the rail corridor is a great area where a potential shared path could occur, and Oleana Waters is already putting part of it in and extending that, and that's where you go to the government and say that's a great place for a shared path, because the beauty is it runs right through the heart of Gawler and takes you right up to one of the most popular places, which is Murray Street. So in terms of what we've recommended, a faster rollout of infrastructure is needed. There are limited funds, and based on our discussions with council members, with council workers, we believe they're actually rolling out the infrastructure in the smartest possible way, given the funds they have available. So one of the things that really needs to occur is if you want to have a better footpath network, a better cycling network, it's going to need a bigger investment. So consideration of things like grants, even raising rates or reallocation of funds within the existing would be a consideration if we want to actually start to get bang for buck in terms of getting some of these things fixed. Otherwise, with the current budget, It will continue to roll out, but there's obviously a maintenance budget as well as an installation budget. And some of the issues are going to be very difficult and very costly to fix ultimately. And the other thing really is about trying to improve the connectivity. And I sort of mentioned before with the public transport, it's the same thing with walking and cycling. If you don't have a connected network and you have sections where it's not great, it then says, well, do I want to walk or cycle, or do I just want to jump in the car? And so I always use, people, the elderly and school children, the vulnerable users, we want them to be able to get out and move around. But if they realise that they can't actually get to where they want to without encountering places where there is a lack of infrastructure, then they're not going to necessarily make that trip that way. So they actually don't have that choice. So the whole assessment really is telling us what we need to do is we need to plan better. Even with the road networks, when we're talking about road hierarchies, it's making sure that the new developments have adequate shared paths, or they have bike lanes, or they have parking, sheltered turns for safety. All of that mixes into providing a much safer and a more connected network. And that's really what needs to be the focus in the short term. Right, so now we'll move on to the, medium to long term. And I would say right now that a lot of the focus is on the long term at the moment. And that is looking at what is going to happen. So what you see on the map, on the screen at the moment, is a map of Gawler. And it actually extends further than that. It extends down to Curtis and up to Roseworthy. Curtis Road and Roseworthy, and that's the model area we're going to look at. And there's nearly 150 zones. The state model has around 40 odd, so we have definitely put in a lot more detail because we want to understand how people will move within Gawler. When we recognise that over 80% of the travel is going to be by car, so it's very important we understand how people get around. There's been a lot of effort put into making sure we get alignment with the land use side of things, so the work that Jensen's been doing. And we also have decided that what we really want to do is focus on a sort of fully developed scenario of what will you ultimately need, what's Gawler ultimately going to look like with the growth. And this is not just growth within the rural southern areas, this is Concordia, this is Roseworthy, this is Playford, because it's all going to impact. Unlike sort of when you look at land use, someone who lives outside of Gawler, they still may want to commute or go to an activity centre through and travel through Gawler. So we need to be looking broader than just Gawler, and that's what we've done. And so to make sure that we have confidence in the information we are using for this, and this is part of why the GITS is following the land use and is trailing, is that we have undertaken several meetings to put forward information which will help provide a better and more confident set of assumptions for this fully developed scenario, which we're calling 2046 plus. So we've met with HIPDO and DIT, we've met with Plus and Renewal SA, because we wanted to get their feedback in, because they're obviously doing work at the moment as well. Next slide. So just a bit of a summary in terms of what we're looking at. So we have multiple growth areas. So we're looking at not just population growth, but also employment. And we're also looking at things like the town centre redevelopment, also the growth in Playford. So what you see there is a range of numbers, which looks at the model area, which is obviously bigger because it covers areas outside of Gawler and then within town of Gawler itself. Which aligns with the Jensen work, and it's really looking at as I say, what I'd call an effectively fully developed scenario, where we have a substantial amount. So Concordia is fully grown, Roseworthy, based on the published figures, is fully grown, and obviously Playford is as per the current projections. So you can see there's substantial growth upwards of 2.5 times the current. Which demonstrates, what could happen. And when's this going to occur? This is a 2046 plus scenario. This could be 2050, 2060, 2070. This is about looking at what it ultimately will look like, so we can understand what we might need. So then when we get to the next stages of planning beyond this strategy, we start to understand what's actually needed ultimately and what do we need to do in the interim. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about modelling now, and this is obviously a bit of a dark art for a lot of people. They think we sit around a cauldron and conjuring up numbers. We don't, but it sometimes appears that way. What we tend to do with modelling is we try and work out how to find the best possible way to provide advice and guidance. The model is not there to tell you the answer, it's there to provide advice and guidance. And so from that, the intention is we want to understand, and the approach we've adopted is the incremental changes. What happens if we change the land use? What happens if we change the public transport? What happens if we change a bit of road infrastructure? So we can then test what happens with and without that to get an appreciation of what the impact of those individual projects are, so we can then look at what they might be together, okay? And so we're looking at two sorts of tests, which is what's required to support the growth, and also a bit of aspirational, what could Gawler be? So what I've got up there is a series of targets, and they talk about accuracy and precision. What we don't want to do is, obviously we'd like high accuracy, high precision, but we know the future is uncertain. And so what we want to actually target is high accuracy, low precision. And what that means is we're trying to make sure that we get the best possible assumption so it's the most likely outcome, and that the actual outcome will fall somewhere within that range. Okay, what we don't want is a low accuracy, high precision, which means we're very precise, but if we're wrong, then we're planning for the wrong outcome, and we don't want that. So what we want to do is make sure that we can sort of narrow in on what we think the likely outcome might be, so that we have that within a range, so we understand it's going to fall within this sort of range, and therefore we can have a bit more confidence in our planning. And so the way we've done that with the diagram on the right is it talks about the various sets of model runs we're going to do, which is we've got the base model run, 2021, then we have our 2041, business as usual, which is referring to current state planning, and then we have our 2046 plus green and Gawler option, where we look at with and without public transport upgrades, and we'll get to that in a minute. But essentially what that means is we're doing a range of options, which means you get a range of dots on the target, and the hope is that we'll be falling within that range. Next slide. So in terms of public transport, as has been mentioned, the Cudler station relocation is very important. So it's not eliminating a station, it's actually relocating it to where we believe the heart of the activity will be. Therefore, that's more likely to get people to be able to use public transport, coupled with things like more high density housing, which enables people to be able to walk to that, which would then give people a viable choice on how they move around. We are looking at rail extensions to Roseworthy and Concordia. There's obviously existing decommissioned tracks, but it's worth bearing in mind that they are single track. So we believe that a 30-minute frequency is likely all you're going to get. And we're not looking at a constraint in terms of the cost. So obviously an extension to Concordia is going to need some sort of grade separation with Murray Street at a minimum. That obviously would need to be investigated, and that obviously would be a very costly exercise. So we're not taking that into consideration. This is all aspirational, and this is all sort of what could be, and therefore what could be in regards to that.
So how will that work? How will that work? Grade separation in Murray Street?
How would it work? Well, that would require detailed planning. I couldn't tell you. I mean, obviously you could go road over, road under. You could go rail over, rail under. And things like flooding would be taken into consideration.
Yeah.
Also the ability for interactions with local land use. And so I won't tell you what it would be, but it obviously would need to go through that process. And there's a planning process you go through to look at that. So if you look at something like Marion Cross, if you know that area well, the tram.
Yes, I do know that area
yeah,
well.
So we were involved in the original planning study, and we looked at a range of options of road over, road under, rail over, rail under. And we came to the realisation that rail over, rail under was the best possible option, and then from there they've gone through with an approach to saying rail over, but that's what's required in terms of detailed planning. That's beyond what we're doing. Our focus is really about making sure that we provide a provision of service so that we can test how many people, if given the choice in the model, would use it. And to that extent, that's why we included some park and ride stations to try and optimise the catchment areas available for people to drive to those stations and use them. And so that's what we're looking at. So we're not taking into consideration what that might mean in regards to costs, because ultimately we're just testing at the moment of what could be, not will be. So it's sort of like an aspirational public transport system. That's what we'd like. And then we'll test that out. So the other thing to note too is that with the PT option, with the testing we'll do within the sub-area model, we'll include walking and cycling.
Is that public transport? Are you talking about public transport, PT?
Yes, PT. Sorry. Yes, PT is public transport. My apologies. Yes, that's correct. So we'll be looking at that.
Councillor Koch?
Thanks me. I mean, you've mentioned the rail, obviously, up to the Barossa. What about the northeast bypass? Have you looked? Is that part of the study, or how does that work?
Are you looking at the northeast bypass?
2 slides. So we're just focused on public transport for now. The next 2 slides we'll talk about. So yeah, that absolutely, yes, we are, 100%.
Okay.
Okay, we'll move on to the next one. So this is a bit of the transformational ideas that we want to test out. And this is not saying we do this. This is about saying what could we do and understand what could the impact be. So at the moment, Murray Street is the heart of Gawler, and it's also carrying up to 20,000 vehicles a day. That's a lot of vehicles to be going through a place of a heavily pedestrianised precinct. So what it is at the moment is it's what we call a movement in a place. So it's a movement because it's a thoroughfare to connect those in the north to the south, and it's also a place because people want to go to this precinct to shop, to eat, to do your banking, to go to the library, whatever it may be. So what we want to do is look at some tests which would then form around transforming this town centre into a highly attractive place for people to want to go by looking at a range of options of how can we reduce the impact of cars and trucks within the precinct. And obviously things like the bypass would be quite important for some of the trucks moving through, but obviously there will still be trucks wanting to make deliveries within the city, and some will have to use this. So the types of options we're looking at are things like, what if we closed off Murray Street between Lyndock and Carlton and turned that into a mall? Pretty radical, but we're just saying what would be the impact of the traffic? How would that function, and would that actually cause tremendous issues, or could that possibly be something that could work? What if we had a dedicated bypass of Murray Street via Julian? Would that then reduce the load on Murray Street? What if we looked at a shared use type activity where maybe we drop the speed limit down to say 30 kilometres an hour and say, provide a bypass and say, hey, if you want to use this, that's because you want to go to this location. So if you think of a place like King William Road down south, if you start to think about that, where it's got a lot of shops, very nice place to visit, but it still has cars moving up and down the road, but they're at a low speed. And it's also about the fact that because it's a low speed, they tend to want to go there because no one wants to really drive slowly to get to a destination. Everyone wants to get there as quickly as possible. So these are the sorts of, I guess, transformational ideas. It's not to say you should do any of them. It's just simply to say, if we thought about doing them, what would be the impact? And this is what the strategy is all about, is saying, what are the potential impacts to start thinking about what could Gawler be in the future? It's not just about there's going to be growth and there's going to be more congestion and that. It's also about, well, how can we actually shape the future? And it might be that these tests say that some of these options are really bad. We'll find out. That's the whole point of doing it, so we can actually understand and provide information to then enable a discussion to be had. Next slide. And so the other element, which is really around building for the growth. So you can see there a range of lines on the map, potential intersection upgrades, potentially new signals. There might be duplication. Say one of the areas we know may be an option is to duplicate between Potts and the Gawler bypass, because obviously Schoenberg Drive ties at the moment into Potts, and with all the growth in Concordia, that traffic's then going to funnel into Main North Road, which is already one of the primary north-south routes. So it might be they need to duplicate there, maybe even an upgrade on Potts, we don't know. That's why we're doing this testing. Or we might look at a route via Bentley to connect to Tyver. We know there's issues around that, but still, let's see what sort of attractiveness it has. Within the rural southern areas, it's about saying we're going to have to build a new network. And one of those key things will be, at the moment, between Tamblin and Dalkeith, it's about 3 kilometres, and there's no crossing in between there. And if we're going to put, 4,000 new dwellings in there, 5,000, whatever it might be, we have a big severance between those that will live on the western side of the tracks and the eastern side of the tracks. So we need to be thinking about, some sort of grade separation, which would provide benefits for both pedestrians, cyclists, buses, and also car users as well, and freight. What else are we looking at? We're looking at in Concordia as well. So you can see the possible bypass. Now that will form 2 functions. One will be to enable residents of Concordia to be able to connect into the Sturt Highway. to then use the Sturt Highway, Gawler Bypass or Northern Expressway to bypass going through Gawler. The other aspect is that it'll enable freight to potentially use that route to bypass the CBD.
Will that have rail on it?
On the freight bypass? No.
No.
At the moment, the PT options we're looking at is just the extension on the existing decommissioned tracks, which is Concordia to the south.
Okay.
Would you be able to just pop back 2 slides, please? Thank you. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So you can see there that the existing rail line sits on sort of the southern...
It goes up there, but I thought there was going to be one coming around that way.
So we haven't looked at... We've looked at basically using the existing track in the sense that providing a rail loop back, it obviously would need a bridge crossing, and rail is quite expensive anyway. And at the moment, we didn't consider that would be something likely. So we tested things that we think are more probable. And I guess that's where the testing with the like the DIT and that is important.
Councillor Kosh, question?
So the rail extension wouldn't go to Lindop, for example. You're just going to the wheat sheaf,
It'll go to the wheat sheaf,
and that's it.
the S-bend.
The S-bend.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, not to Lindop.
Oh, sorry, turned it off. There you go. Oh, there you go.
We got there.
There you go.
That would be tying into the expected sort of potential centre of Concordia. So part of it is just making sure that it goes to that. Extensions out to the Barossa are, again, beyond the sort of scope of what we'd be looking at. That's more of a regional strategy. I understand it, but at the same time, we're focusing more on what would impact Gawler itself. Beautiful. We can just go 2 slides. Yeah, thank you. So one of the other things we're going to have a look at is potentially that freight bypass tying up to Horrocks Highway. We know Roseworthy has a potential to grow, and they have retail centres and housing, and it's also about providing that connectivity between the regions as well. And then in terms of one of the big issues with Gawler East is that the Concordia traffic, if it doesn't go up to Sturt Highway, is going to have to go to Schoenberg Drive, and at the moment there's no direct link to Schoenberg Drive, and we think there'll be a range of options that the department will ultimately look at, and they're the types of options we're going to look at. So looking at Cheek Avenue on its own, looking at potentially Sunnydale, and then looking at a potential third option, and looking at combinations to see what are the impacts. Again, we're not recommending what should be done. We're merely trying to test to understand what could happen.
So there needs to be a bridge over the North Para.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the key things of why the rail would be problematic in terms of you'd need a bridge for that as well. And I know the department are doing another planning study on the Northern Bypass at the moment. I don't know the details, I just know I'm aware of it. And obviously the location of that bridge will be quite critical in terms of the location of the road. But it will need to connect into the Sturt Highway. If it doesn't connect in...
So with Schomburg Drive, that will be a collector road. That will be a collector road.
Yes, it effectively operates as a collector road in a way already.
Well, it will be a collector road, so that should be a state government road.
No, collector roads tend to be the domain of council. If it gets up to an arterial road, then it would be the domain of the department. And depending on the planning and how Schomburg Drive, say, connected in, maybe via Cheek, maybe to the freight bypass, it could then theoretically become an arterial road because it would be a movement through, not a movement to. And that is the difference between why Schomburg Drive currently sits under council's control, because it doesn't provide a connection through the precinct, it provides it to Gawler East, but if ultimately it was to connect through, yes, it may then have an arterial type function, which council could then consider discussions with the department for sure.
Thank you.
And again, they're the types of things we want to test to provide you with advice and guidance. And that's really the key thing. We want to do this testing so we start to understand what might be, so we can start to understand what you might want to start to plan for. So
what will the Sturt intersection look like?
I would expect a grade separation. Given what I've heard and the current state of the Sturt Highway, you would not have a high volume road connect into it. It would be a grade separated interchange. That would be my expectation.
Okay, thank you.
And that's what we will model. So we're modelling on the basis of what we believe would occur. It's not to say it will, but based on the fact that it is a 110 kilometre, 4-lane highway, you're not going to have signalised intersections, and you're not going to have unsignalised intersections when it comes to a high volume. It just won't meet the warrants.
So you'll have to merge in. You'll have to merge in.
Well, if you want to cross it or head north, for instance.
Well, wouldn't that be a traffic hazard?
Correct. That's why you'd want to have a grade separation. So you'd have probably, you'd say the new bypass would grade separate over. That's the most likely outcome, and then you'd have ramps to connect in each side to ensure that you have full functionality with the road.
Thank you. Oh, well,
I've got one slide to go, so I can wrap up pretty quickly.
We'll keep on going. Yeah, we'll keep on going. Next steps.
So next steps, this is just really to inform and make sure everyone understand what's going to happen. So at the moment, we're talking with the department to get the SAM model run. So that's the SAM model is Strategic Adelaide Model. So that is the model that underpins all planning, transport planning work for the state government within the model area. And we've kindly asked the department, and they are helping us with this, to run those demand options that we've put forward. We'll then get information from them. We'll then run the sub-area model. We'll review the results, which will then inform the draft report. We'll then go through a consultation process, as Andrew's already outlined, so that we can then get that feedback and understand what that is. And remember that what we're trying to do is work out what the next step should be for council in terms of whether it be advocacy or whether it be further planning, so that we can understand what the concerns of the community are and how that fits in with what next steps council might want to make.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, James. Okay. I think we'll wrap this up. We'll have a 10-minute break. We'll have a 10-minute break, and then we'll start our special council meeting. let's get started. If everyone can take their seats. If everyone can take their seats. So we're catching up on Friday. We're catching up on Friday. 1 o'clock. Okay. Okay. Right. Lots of people here. I'd like to acknowledge the land that we meet on tonight is the traditional lands for the Gawler people, and that we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. We also acknowledge the Gawler people as the custodians of the Greater Adelaide region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are still as important to the living Gawler people today. Roll call. Where's Paul Kosh gone? Oh, he's gone. He's having... Right. So I think we might wait for Paul to come back. So we've got Nathan Shanks on leave of absence. We've got Ethan White on leave of absence. And are there any... Thank you, Paul. Have we got... There's no apologies and no non-attendance. There's no deputations. Any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. So we'll move to decision reports, Gawler Growth Framework. I'm on page 4 of 274. Gawler Growth Framework and Southern Rural Areas discussion paper. If anyone's... Yes? Yes, thank you. I was just thinking that there might be somebody beaming in on the live stream, so welcome you all. So Michael McGowan from Jensen Plus and James Parrott from SMEC will give a brief presentation. Well, we've had the brief presentation, haven't we? On consultation findings to date and project progress on the Gawler Growth Framework comprising the land use plan and integrated transport strategy. But we've had that, haven't we? Yes. So are you able to answer any questions? If we've got an officer's recommendation, and if you look up on the screen, there's been some adjustments to that council. Can we move it up? No, up. Sorry, Nikita. Notes that, and there's a part 6. There's a part 6. So that's I've approved that. So that's notes that a part 6. So. Five. Part 6 is the new one. No, it's not. 5 becomes 6. 5 is the new. Oh, 5 is the new. Acting Chief Executive was to make any amendments of a minor or technical nature to the draft Gawler Growth Framework, draft Gawler Integrated Transport Strategy, technical memo and Southern Rural Areas discussion paper prior to community engagement commencing. So that's the new point 5. So do we all know what we're voting on? Who wants to move it? Would you like to move it, Councillor Solomon?
Thank you, Mayor Redmond. I'm happy to move the officer's recommendation here. Also happy to accept the change. I did notice one small spelling error on one of the pages, so that would be helpful. Though the rest of it was very good.
Where's the spelling error?
I'll point it out after, because now that we've given the CEO approval to make a minor change, I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm just saying the rest of it was very well drafted, so well done to staff. for that. We've heard a lot tonight about that the work that has gone into the growth framework and especially in the transport study. We know a lot of work's gone into the SRA discussion paper as well, and this is absolutely necessary work for us to be doing as a town. It's the kind of work that I think, it forms the basis of a lot of the decisions that we ought to be making, and it also helps us to avoid a lot of problems which, we currently are dealing with, because I think, where this could have helped us in past situations, it's unfortunate we didn't have it, but now we do have it, and so in the future we can help to plan better so that we have less problems and we're debating less things of a minor nature in the future. This plan as well, I like how it talks about Murray Street as a destination rather than just a thoroughfare. I think that's really important because it changes the conversation, it changes the dynamic of how we look at things. When that bypass goes in from Concordia, we need to ensure that our main street and our businesses are thriving. We need to make sure that it's somewhere where people want to be and that people aren't just simply bypassing Gawler and it dies. That's absolutely critical, and I think that mentioning it, Murray Street as a destination, as a place where people want to be, that's really important in here. It talks about investment in critical infrastructure, which is necessary for the growth that we're going to have. It talks about the kind of, not just physical infrastructure, but the social infrastructure as well, how we protect the environment that we do have here. It's about growing sustainably, good planning, good services, opportunities for employment. It's about having that real social interaction and ensuring that all parts of our town are able to be safe. When we fail to do that, then we have issues, like we have a lack of investment in places like Murray Street. We have a lack of infrastructure in places where it makes it safe for people to live and people to go to, whether it's kids play or people interact and socialise with one another. I think the transport strategy as well, it's great to see some of the things in there. When we go to the state government now, we have a real plan. We can go to the state government, we can say, you underservice Gawler, we don't have appropriate public transport, give it to us. And then they will turn around and say, no, what makes you more important than any of the rest of the state? But now that we've done this work, we have the evidence to say, Gawler is actually underserviced. This should be a priority. This is where the growth is. This is something you should be investing in. And of course, when those elections and things do come around, because we're not, it's not all non-political, but when those elections and things do come around, rather than just saying, here's a sporting club you can put some money into, imagine if we could turn around and say, here's an instant winner for you, how about you invest in a new bus route? And we have the evidence to say, this is going to be viable and people are going to absolutely love it. Minister will absolutely jump at that. A local MP will jump at that opportunity. But we now have the evidence to be able to go and say that to them. So I think this work is, is important. It's about time we did it. We love to see, as well, I know a lot of work, and it's the more controversial area that I might have some disagreements on with other people in the chamber, but in the southern rural areas, we have a real plan where I think we're actually starting to look at the facts of what's viable down there. And for the first time, in my opinion, we have some real options about the kind of things that we can have down there. We have done the research, we've done Jensen, we've done the ARIS report, we've done, the RDA have done their report as well. We've got so much information on this, and I think finally we've gotten to a stage, despite the probable consultation fatigue that some in our community might have from this, we've gotten to a stage where we're talking about it realistically. I think that what we've done here, and congratulate staff on, is that they've improved on Jensen. We now have that river corridor in there, which is so vital, to protecting biodiversity in our town as well. We have realistic expectations about what can happen in Cudler, because we know that horticulture is not viable there, and we're admitting that, and we're saying, okay, what's the alternative? What do we do here? And so we're giving those opportunities, and we're giving that clarity to the people that live in that area on what can be done. There's been a tongue-in-cheek joke as well, which has been said a couple of times. There's more horses than people next to the current Cudler station. We're working with state government to ensure that we can actually work, we actually plan for that development which is going to happen in there, and that they are so keen on, and making sure that people have real access to public transport infrastructure. But we're also looking at the activity centres we'll have down there. There's people in the southern areas, whether it's Hillier, Cudler, out in Evanston South, who find that it's easier to go to Monopara, and they associate more with Monopara than they do with parts of Gawler. Imagine if they had something in their backyard which they could point to and where they could go, where they were staying in our town, they were shopping in our town, they were doing activities in our town. And I think that's a really, really good thing to be looking at. We need to plan for growth. Some might disagree, but growth to me it's inevitable. It's coming, and we either plan for that growth in a sustainable way where we protect the things that we love about our town, we ensure that people are safe, we ensure that we have good services, we ensure that we have successful businesses and we're actually encouraging positive development, or we get rolled over and we have something which looks like Cudler at the moment, where it's so fractured, there's no real infrastructure, and we just know everything we don't want it to be, but we don't have an idea of what we do want. And I think that encapsulates something which I've been saying since the very beginning, which is that for the southern rural areas at least, for years, I think before I was born, we have said what we don't want there. In the last 25 years, I can't point to anything which has said what we do want. And that's what I want to congratulate staff on, because I think that we have a draft that we can take to our community, and what we will eventually get back is not a list of things that we don't want to occur in the southern rural area, but we'll have a vision for what we do want our town to look like. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to second this motion. I very much concur with Councillor Solomon's remarks. I think there's been a lot of work, a lot of thought, a lot of planning. We're now in a very good situation to move forward. Not that I don't think that there'll be a lot of community feedback to this, and I look forward to that. I think, but what we have got is something that now is quite detailed, and it needs to be detailed, because it is part of a long-term planning document. But I think, for example, and Councillor Koch mentioned it tonight, our inner urban break has suddenly become more like a rural living area, and I think that that's going to raise some issues and some concerns with people. But regardless of that, what we now have is a really coordinated three-pronged approach to dealing with the growth that is coming our way. And we said right at the beginning of this process, we didn't want to be a Mount Barker. We wanted to be well prepared and indicate very clearly what it is the community wants. So I think we've met that, and the next stage is to ask the community to come back and respond to it and give us their feedback so we can make the final adaptations, and sincerely we will do when we hear back from the community. And at the same time, we'll be in time to allow our input into the GARP system, the Greater Adelaide Regional Plan. Thank you.
Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, I echo my fellow councillors in a lot of areas. The handoff, having Gawler Main Street, Murray Street having nearly double handoff traffic, and the amount of money the state government's been looking into that, and also the freight issues that we do. I often see semis in our Main Street areas and just think, they shouldn't be anywhere near there, and the damage that they do to our curbing and infrastructure and everything else is terrible as well. But yeah, we certainly have been undervalued. And I think just doing this in a holistic way is really good. It's really good to see the traffic side of things and the growth all in one plan, which is fantastic. So the bus train situation, the park and rides, I think Tamberlin Station has got a really good opportunity for growth there, and if we can offer undercover car parking, that'd get a lot of vehicles out of Murray Street into those park and ride areas and get them. And yeah, just that Murray Street, the amount of traffic that goes through the southern Barossa and light using Murray Street is just wrong. So I am still concerned that we're not going to get the bridge over the North Para River for Concordia. We haven't had that promised to us at all.
No.
We still haven't had any promises about an eastern bypass through Tiver or any of those areas. Bentley Road has got a lot of issues. We have in the past been promised about the duplication of Main North Road through Gawler. That I think is a given and should happen no matter what. But those bypasses are really vital for the future of Gawler, and we really need some promises that they're actually going to happen in the future. I think this planning will help that, but I think, as I've been told before with public transport, we've got to really advocate for our community for improvements of public transport, and it's not brought up enough that our public transport is substandard and needs to be improved. And with Roseworthy and Concordia developments, we need a lot of work. And I mean, it's already been mentioned about Mount Barker. Mount Barker is got a lot of issues, and we need to be very careful about Gawler's future and really work very hard to make sure that we don't, that we can get this critical infrastructure in place and not have these developments without the critical infrastructure. And that's a huge concern of mine, because we just haven't had any of those promises yet at all. But we've got 10,000 people at Concordia, and we've got that issue of maybe this massive area at the S-bend of Gawler East, which would be the hub of Concordia, and very close to our main street as well. So the destination of Murray Street is important, but it's also that through traffic that we've got to sort out, because it does really affect our town.
Thank you.
Happy with moving to the next stages.
Thank you. I'd like to congratulate Andrew Goodsell and our team for the work on the Gawler Growth Framework and Southern Rural Areas discussion paper. I think that's been a really good piece of work. So thank you very much. Councillor Koch?
Some parts of what we've discussed tonight I think are good. I think the transport elements we need to really get sorted out. I'm concerned about the train, from Concordia, going under or over Murray Street. I'm concerned about the northeast bypass, whether it goes over the North Para, its connection. I mean, you're talking a lot of money. If someone doesn't stump up the money, we're in trouble. I am concerned about Southern rural zone, and the speed at which this has happened. And I don't think we really have connected with the community properly. There was one session and people came in and said, we don't want growth, etc., etc. But then we just rolled on to another couple of sections where we invented, through mud maps, these scenarios, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and we ended up with Gawler Green, which I think is a misnomer, actually, because we're already doing everything that Gawler Green says it will do. We've already got a 30% coverage in our neighbourhoods, existing neighbourhoods. We already have a biodiversity plan to look after the rivers, etc., etc. We're not going to have paths and creeks because it's too dangerous. So really, we're getting nothing. It's just words. It's just motherhood statements to me. My big concern is that we will just be consumed into Greater Adelaide, full stop. That is urban sprawl. When I talk to people in Gawler, over and over and over and over and over again, they say, we do not want to be part of Greater Adelaide. We come to Gawler because it's a town. We like the physical separation. What we have here is not a break at all. I mean, now we've told there's going to be, one house per acre within in that little area. So really, it's not a break at all. Because what happens is you get an acre, you put a house on it, you put a shed on it, a couple of trees, That's it. It's just sprawl, basically. I'm concerned about the figures that were quoted about growth, how quick it is. You know, on page 117 of 275, the Jensen report actually says that the state government's forecasts tend to be over-optimistic. So they're talking about high or medium. And I think at the moment the growth has come on because of the COVID, and it'll probably drop back down to low again, which is historically where it's been. And, you know, we're probably looking at 25 years for the southern rural zone by the time growth happens in Gawler East and all the other areas. So, I mean, that's what you're looking at. So I don't understand what the haste is in doing this when we're probably looking at 20 to 30 years away, really. And I haven't seen any commitment from anybody to build precinct down there or do anything. And also the infrastructure, I'm really concerned about the infrastructure. We'll have a structure plan, but, you know, again, I keep on going back to, you know, social infrastructure. I don't see that in here. I just get concerned. I'm concerned about once you've got a structure plan, people can put in a plan to do things on a structure plan, and I think we're going to miss out on the infrastructure because it'll be a little bit higgledy-piggledy. Someone will just go, oh, well, I'll do this, and what they won't contribute to infrastructure, for example, especially social infrastructure. So I'm pretty concerned, and I do hope that, you know, the community does come out, because this is an incredibly radical thing for Gawler, because Gawler has defended that space around us for 100 years probably, for ages. We've lost that space to the north of us, and, you know, I think they'll get pretty concerned about the sprawl. I mean, we saw how people reacted with Fedulis, and people around this table supported that group. I would hope that if the mood of the community is similar, that the people around here would support that, you know, the views of the community, because this chamber did for Fedulis. So I probably won't vote for it because I think this should take more time, and I think the consultation period should be longer, and I think we should be really engaging with the community, because I think at the moment it's a plan that was imposed on us from elsewhere, and you know, people say, well, what would you do? What would you do with population? Well, the first thing I would be doing is getting the state government to incentivize a TOD at Tambling, because that was promised to us, and that was what was going to happen. Yeah. I'd be saying, let's get the TOD organised properly. Let's get the TOD organised properly at Manapara. That's where you can actually make efficient gains, you know, efficient use of the rail system. That's what I believe. And probably for Cuddler, I'd be looking at a more open style living, but also integrating horticulture and agriculture, because there are new crops coming through. There is another generation of horticulturalists and agriculturalists that will be looking to grow food with low food miles and growing closer to the populations. So we're actually taking away the future of those future educated, skilled horticulturalists and agriculturalists, because that's what that land was always used for historically, and I think it should stay like that and allow the next generation. The previous generation, they actually did all that. They want to move on, that's fine. I think it should be retained for the future generations of those up-and-coming horticulturalists and agriculturalists. So that would be my scenario if someone asked me, you know, what I would like, and that's what I would like. And I think a lot of the in the community would agree with me. So thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor.
I'll support this motion. I think, I agree with Councillor Koch that we should be making sure everyone's engaged and understands what's going on here, and that is the motion that we are approving, is to go out to community engagement. But yes, we do need people to understand all of this stuff. A lot of it is, it is quite radical in some ways, but we are the fact is that the town of Gawler is not a sovereign nation, and we have to deal with the, different levels of government that make the decisions ultimately on things like housing. And what we can do is hopefully make it so that we have an acceptable housing situation that is not just the worst scenario, which is randomly placed housing with no commercial district and no proper public transport routes, which is not out of the question. So I was particularly impressed by the integrated transport strategy draft. I'm the one councillor on this council who stubbornly insists on trying to take public transport or walk all over the town constantly. And I'll tell you that if you're worried about 50 kilometres an hour on Schomburg, my walking tour of Schomburg is around 5 kilometres an hour, and I don't really have better ways to get up there a lot of the time. So that's the kind of situation where there are places that are just not viable by public transport. You just, if you're going into Murray Street or if you're going to the Gawler railway station, there are many routes to take you there if you live in areas that service buses to those locations. But if you're out on the edges, if you're out in Evertston Gardens, if you're out on Aspire Estate, if you're out at Springwood, where a lot of all these new developments are, you're just expected to have a car, because even getting to the Gawler railway station or Gawler Central railway station is not guaranteed for those people, because the transport routes just aren't there. So I think that's some very important work, and hope that we can continue to go down that path in making sure we have a connected town of Gawler.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councillor Samble.
Thank you, Mayor Karen. Yes, I'd like to congratulate Jensen, Michael and Patton and what's been said, but I'll just throw a couple of things in which has bothered me for a number of years, and it seems to be getting worse, is that we have a magnificent train system from Gawler to Adelaide now. But try and find somewhere to park your car to go on it. I've also got property in the Goyder Council, and I'm involved with the Goyder Council. And they come down here to shop. This afternoon I was doing the shop like most husbands have to do when their wives tell them to go and do it, up at Springwood up here. And blow me down, there was 2 people, one from Burra and one from Tarawi. I said, I didn't know you did your shopping down here. They said, yes, it's fantastic, lovely day out, come down here, friendly atmosphere and everything and so forth. We would like to go down to Adelaide from here, but as has been known for a long time, all of the people in the Barossa Valley and our surrounding area come down here, and by 8:30 in the morning, and this has been proven many times, even by the railways, every car park is full near where the railway station is, whether it's down the southern end here or over, and they already have extended it over at the main central station. And they're there, parked there all day, right? Because they're working in Adelaide. That makes common sense. But for somebody to come in town, I heard Councillor Solomon say about the fact that a bypass will take trade away. Well, the trade's taken away when you don't provide car parking. And at the moment, if people want to come down from the north, shop in Gawler, then maybe go on into town, do a bit of shopping or whatever, and then travel on back up, there's nowhere to park their cars. And that's been proven time and time again. The other part about it is, when I took the acting CEO, Andrew, for a drive, and Jack, is there's a car park down on top of Target, down the bottom of the street here. 225 car parks. Great to do burnouts if you want to up the top, because you won't hit anybody. There's nobody parked there. Any day of the week, please go there. Jimmy goes up there to muck around his motor car. Why aren't people parking there? It's less than a 5-minute walk up here to the main street. We're not promoting that enough, and also to support the people that own the Target complex. The other thing is that Councillor Isaac said about the point of people not coming into Gawler. I've not heard of who the other businesses are, only other by gossip around the area. Like, what sort of a shopping centre is going to be built in Concordia when it happens? No one knows. I've heard some stories about the shopping centres out at Roseworthy. Wow, they're big. And if we don't get our act together properly here, they'll be out there shopping. Also, there's big discussions about one at Everson Gardens, a big block of land that's been sold, you know, and so forth. So, Councillor Solomon, people will shop where they get friendly service and all that. I went out to Aggle Vale the other day there. Now that's all been redeveloped. Man, oh man, I'll go again. It's fantastic. And that, I believe, is what people of Gawler want, is to be able to, as Pat said, about getting around the town. The only thing wrong, Pat, the buses are there. I go for a ride on those buses and bugger me, it's lonely because there's nobody else on them. And we don't promote that beautiful service that's in our town. And I think if it was promoted more people would use it, and then we wouldn't have to use the on-demand or one that you're referring to. So I congratulate, I'll certainly support it, because we've got to have somewhere to go, and I believe you gentlemen and our staff have done a fantastic job, and we're heading in the right directions, hopefully, once the government make their decision about this, readjustment to the land in their area. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Can you wrap up the debate? Thank you, Councillor Solomon.
Thank you, Mayor Edmund. Just to wrap up, I think sentiment's fairly the same around the chamber, though we have some small disagreements, or rather large disagreements actually, but they're small in the gist of this report. I just want to, of course, say that some of what Councillor Samble said, I totally agree with. People shop where they get friendly service, and I think we have great shops here in Gawler, and we have great small businesses, and people really appreciate that good service that they're able to get from small businesses. But the major issue, which I'm sure Councillor Samble would agree with, is that if you've got cars coming down Murray Street and it takes you 10 minutes to get across, then you're not going to go there, you're going to go somewhere that's more convenient. So how do we make sure we do have that adequate parking that Councillor Samble was talking about? How do we make sure that we do have, a Main Street which is welcoming and which you can get across so that you can go to your local shops? That's the kind of thing that we're looking at in this plan, and I think that's what we're going to get out of it. Of course, I think the prospect of also what was talked about in the plan, Councillor Deputy Mayor Davies alluded to, is that getting that public transport and getting around the town, that's an exciting prospect, because we're talking about the kind of Gawler that is thriving and where people are using that transport to get around the town, not just to get to the train to get out. I think that's, Councillor Samble said there's no one on the buses during the day, and that's a large part of it, I think, because the people who are actually using those buses are getting on it at one specific time of the day to get to the train line to go to work somewhere else, and then they're getting on the buses to get back home, if the buses are still running at that point. And that's the problem, is that we don't have those services which are actually getting people around the town. If I want to go from my home in Gawler East to Evanston, I can't get there unless I, catch the bus down here into the main street and then get off and walk across the road, go down to Gawler Central, and then catch the train down to Evanston. And it's that hard to get around such a small town. So I really appreciate what we're looking at in that space. In regards to the southern rural areas, I know that we're going to disagree on this. I'm going to have disagreements with other people in the chamber. I'm not sure haste is the word. I mean, there's been an opportunity to do something about this since I was in Nappy, so I'm not sure that's hasty. But and I don't necessarily agree with the idea that it's mud maps, either Jensen 1, Jensen 2, ARIS, the RDA report. These are all things that I've read that have informed my view about the southern rural areas. We've consulted for about 25 years on this. If we're trying to defend the space around our town, we've done a pretty bad job, and I think that's because we haven't had a plan which talks about any ambition. It doesn't talk about any vision. We've said what we don't want. And, we have this idea of the green belt, the not-so-green green belt, if you've been down there, which is actually old shipping containers, dilapidated greenhouses, and, maybe a bit of, fire hazard down there as well. If we want something, if we want a greener Gawler, we need to define what that looks like, and we need to get an approach where we actually have something down there for a green belt. But we need to be realistic. We have that option. We're talking about investigations in Hillier, which would make horticulture viable, but they're not there at the moment. If we want them to be there, we have to prove that it's actually viable. We have to give them the resources to do that. If you want to make ends meet, if you want to make below minimum wage growing bush tomatoes, which is what you have to do if you want to do horticulture in Cudler according to the ARIS report, then, you know, good luck to you. But the majority of people don't want to do that. So what we've actually outlined in here is some real solutions, some options for people to come and have their feedback and talk about what's realistic, what we can achieve. And then at the end of it, we've worked with our entire town, people in the SRA, people up in Evanston, all the way through out to Gawler East and to the other side in Williston, and they have had a say in what the future of their town looks like. I'm not sure I've seen this articulated before, and that's why I'm so happy to be supporting it, because I think it's bold, it's ambitious, and nothing bold is easy, but it's sorry, I was going to say a word that probably wouldn't be appropriate there, but it's a really good job from staff to get to this point, and I think this work has been a long time coming, and it's been a long time coming. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. The debate is closed. I'll put that motion. All those in favour? All those against? It is carried. Thank you. Sorry, division. Councillor Solomon has called a division. All those in favour, please stand. Please stand. So we've got Councillor Mick Lorna, Councillor Deputy Mayor Davies, Councillor Vallelonga, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Solomon, Councillor Hennessy, Councillor Samball. Please stay standing. Those against is Councillor Paul Kosh. Thank you. You may take your seats. Okay. Okay, so 9:03, we can close the meeting at 9:04. Thank you. Next ordinary meeting is the 23rd of July, commencing at 7 p.m. Thank you.